All right, guys, we're gonna get started. I'm sure we'll have people filing in. I'd be polite and give them time, but we're on a tight schedule. So. Welcome to Hybrid Sandboxing, create the ultimate on and off premises test dev factory. We've set kind of lofty goals for ourselves by saying it's the ultimate test dev factory, so we'll try our best to live up to the hype. But the main primary goal of the session is when we talk to customers, a lot of times people just don't even know where to start, right? So we've heard about vCloud Air. Who here feels like they're at least familiar now with our hybrid cloud offering? Okay, cool. Because I know we launched in the US last September, but we made our Germany announcement this week. And of course, we already have our data centers in the UK. So as we're making our way, a lot of times we talk to folks and they just don't even know where to start, right? The cloud obviously started in the world of this kind of on-demand compute and new workloads, but how does that apply to what we do in the 9-to-5 enterprise, right? So disclaimers, you guys probably know these better than I do by now because you've seen how many of them this week already. I am Jay Marshall. I'm a principal cloud development strategist on the vCloud Air team. I've actually spent the past few years as a solutions architect at VMware and spent the prior 15 years of my career or so as an application developer. That's my world. So this area is very near and dear to me because I've worked in the enterprise for many years, and I don't know if anybody attended the Team Spirit session that I did earlier on this morning, but we had a very spirited chat about IT and developers and the challenges of me getting resources out of you folks and you guys being annoyed at me because I don't care about what you have to do to keep it up and running, right? So I think that's an area why, as we look to how hybrid cloud and a hybrid cloud based on the same vSphere that you guys run in your data center, hopefully we'll be able to show you some valuable ways to approach that. I am joined by Roshni Pari.
Thank you.
Is that for her? Wow.
Hi, I'm Roshni Pari. I'm a senior product marketing manager with the vCloud Air team at VMware. I joined VMware 3 years ago, and I'm responsible for storage, hybrid management, and compliance. And as Jay, I was a developer in my past life, and I started my career as a .NET developer.
I didn't realize you had so many fans.
You're embarrassing me now, Jay. Moving on. Okay, so vCloud Hybrid Service is now vCloud Air. I'm sure already you are familiar with this already. And we've had how many sessions so far with the exact same slide?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Between the disclaimer slide and this, I think you guys get it, right? So, you may have also seen this slide if you attended Massimo and Angelos Kotis, also in our business unit, talking about kind of how to get started with hybrid cloud, our 5 starting points. So it's a little bit of a mess, but that's on purpose, because that's kind of what our day-to-day lives are, right? So we talk about things like test dev, which we'll be looking at today, of using the cloud for a variety of ways to get started with workloads and how we can kick the tires. We also have had sessions around extending your data center, so things like Exchange and SharePoint and being able to have certain components running in the cloud with the rest staying in your data center. Things like disaster recovery, so taking your existing vSphere implementation and doing DR to our cloud. Data protection, so taking existing workloads on the cloud and doing backups and keeping those VMs safe. Things like building new enterprise applications, so things like web servers, app servers, data caching layer on the cloud, but being able to communicate back to a backend database. And then true next generation application development for things like platform as a service, mobile backend as a service, once again, in a hybrid context. So a lot going on up here, but trying to illustrate, once again, your hybrid data center and how you can start looking at how to strategize, how to build that out over time. So what we're here to talk about today is taking applications and what are the different ways that we can start doing test dev. Because test dev environments are dynamic, right? So we're going to talk about taking workloads, moving them out to the cloud, updating them, bringing them back, starting new projects and bringing them back because they're based on vSphere, and we'll look at that over the next hour with a couple of demos. So, our agenda. We first want to kind of frame what it is we're trying to solve, right? So you guys see a lot of bits and bytes throughout the week. You see the next new features in all of our products. This session is going to be a little bit more about how do we plan for this, right? How do we build these environments in a way that will make a difference in our current 4 walls? We're going to define kind of what we mean by a test dev factory, So it sounds kind of cool, but what are we really going to do? And then we're going to kind of dig into 4 specific themes. So 4 different ways that you can maybe consider starting with vCloud Air in your test dev lifecycle.
Thank you. So how many test dev environments do you have today? You have your development, then you have your unit test, you have your integration test, performance test, UAT, staging, and finally production. So every time you have to set up a new app, you have to do it 7x times. And this example is from one of the customers that I've worked in the past. It's a banking customer based in New York. It's not a made-up story. You probably may not have 7 different environments, but you may at least have 3 or 2. So every time you have to set up a new application environment, you have to do it at least 2 times. And we all know that test dev environments are highly dynamic. It's hard to predict the capacity that you need for your test dev environments. So if you have to copy your application environment over and over and over again, and if it's a highly dynamic environment, you're wasting a lot of capacity.
Doesn't work.
So how do you do this? How do you actually set up your test dev environment? And what are the different ways that you can actually do it? The first option is setting it up on-prem, and this is what most of our customers, most of you do today. So you can set up capacity for your integration, for your production, staging, and all the different environments that you have. But if you take this route, is it the most cost-effective way? I don't think so, because you'll be allocating 70% of your capacity for test dev, and out of that, 50% remains unused. So there's a lot of wastage if you take this route.
So one thing real quick on this. So I touched on this in one of my earlier sessions. The important thing you want to take out of here is from a business perspective, in particular your finance departments, those boxes on the right are the only ones that they think make money, right? So everybody in this room, we know you need the boxes on the left to get to the boxes on the right. But from a pure cost perspective, when we show you some of these different ways you can attack test dev, you can make the argument that you don't need a cloud for some of these things. But when you start thinking about how do I shrink my investments and not have to over-provision or have way more capacity than I know I need in these 3-year buy cycles plus, how can I incorporate cloud so I can purchase things on demand, for example, with our new on-demand product?
Yeah, and even if you overcommit, even if you over-provision for your test dev environments, even if you save some amount of capacity, there's only so much you can save. You'll be still allocating a lot of your capacity for your test dev, and a lot of that will not be unused. I'm sure David here can attest to that, for sure. So let's look at the next option. What's the next best option? Next best option is, of course, to supplement your on-prem capacity with any public cloud. So the first step is to subscribe to a public cloud service. Then you have to provision and configure your instance or VM on the public cloud. Then you have to configure your networking OS and your application environment. And you have to do this every single time for all the different environments that you want to configure. And it's not an easy way, because once you've set it up and once you have all the different environments in a public cloud scenario, if you want to integrate it back to your on-prem, it's not an easy task because there's limited network integration between your on-prem and all these public cloud environments. The management tools are separate. The processes and skill sets required, it's separate. So it's a silo. It's extremely different from what you have in your on-premise environment. So let's look at the best option. Supplement your on-premise environment with vCloud Air, or hybrid sandboxing with vCloud Air. And I have a couple of pointers here on why it is the most effective way. Number one, you can recreate the exact same environment. If you have vSphere on-prem, you can migrate your applications as is, meaning once you test, all the test and all the development and everything is going to hold, because it's a like-to-like environment. All the applications that are certified on vSphere are certified on vCloud Air. And it's exact same replica. The networking configurations, everything is going to be exactly same. And it is a resilient cloud. The vCloud Air platform provides you HA capacity. We provide you dedicated HA capacity for dedicated cloud and shared HA capacity for our multi-tenant virtual private cloud. Then you can migrate VMs and vApps using vCloud Connector. How many of you are familiar with the vCloud Connector product here?
Cool.
Okay, few. So vCloud Connector is now free. It's an appliance that you can install in your on-prem data center. You can move your VMware-based virtual machines to vCloud Air and back. It's not a one-way street. You can move it to vCloud Air, do all the test dev, and move it back if you want to host your production application in your on-prem environment. Then another cool feature from vCloud Connector is the content sync. You can synchronize your templates. You can push all the IT-approved templates to all these different template libraries so that as an IT admin, you can make sure that only the templates that you push through, that you approve, are used by your developers. Then Jay will talk more about how you can use the vRealize automation or VCAC, vCloud Automation Center, to stamp out IT blueprints and automate your whole SDLC lifecycle process. And finally, you can overcommit CPU and RAM if you subscribe to our dedicated cloud. We provide you exclusive compute nodes. So whatever is your overcommit ratio, if it's 1:20 or 1:10, you can use exactly the same thing in vCloud Air.
So what we want to talk about now, a lot of these features that Roshni is referring to around the commonality of the platform, or things like content sync, which means that when you guys create those OS templates and any agents you put on, or any patching, or anything that you do to create this kind of blessed configuration of a virtual machine, okay, and being able to share that on vCloud Air, that's very differentiating to our platform. So what I want to step back on is this concept of this anatomy of an app. So I talk about a lot of my background being developer-oriented. A lot of the projects that I worked on in the early 2000s were based on WebSphere, WebSphere Application Server. And so how many folks here have worked with WebSphere or any J2E stack? So WebLogic, WebSphere, so quite a few. Not surprising, right? So they've been very pervasive. Anybody from like the early 2001 to 2004 range, J2E? And it was really fun, right? So that stuff hasn't gone away, right? And even as the newer versions and a lot of the newer kind of iterations of the J2E framework, if you will, have made things a lot easier, it doesn't mean that we started taking advantage of all of that, because this is our standard. This is how we do things. So what I want to paint out here is, I'm going to go kind of top-bottom instead of bottom-up, as we typically do with VMware. From an application server perspective, whatever your container might be, of course, sitting on top of an operating system, on top of vSphere, on top of the metal, right? And that's fine. Nothing big surprising there. But what I want to wrap contextually here is there's usually multiple apps sitting on that stack, right? So when we sit and talk about an application or a 3-tier app or 5 nodes, sometimes it gets awash in a one app type scenario. But this is what we typically have, right? We have multiple applications sitting on top of that stack. And over the course of the past 10, 15 years, the amount of configuration that we've had to dial in at the WebSphere level, at the OS level, at the vSphere level, is pretty mind-boggling, right? These weren't things that anybody here dropped down WebSphere, click next, finish, and just start using WebSphere, right? I mean, it's challenging, we'll say. And even at the OS level, it might be just simple things like min and max values on a JVM, but usually it's a lot more than that. The point is, you're dialing in this entire stack to make your exact configuration, your exact app scream, right? So, I mean, the beauty of vSphere for years now has been, as long as the hardware that you're racking and stacking and plugging together is on our hardware compatibility guide, this entire thing just goes wherever you want it to, right? It's been pretty cool for VMware and our customers. But when you actually start thinking about the public cloud, what are you doing with that stuff? Now, you can draw a line in the sand and just move on, right? But everything underneath that dotted line, maybe the operating system, depends on how you have things dialed in. Maybe you could move that. But pretty much everything underneath that dotted line, you lose, right? So what all do you have to do configuration-wise? What about your OS versions? What about all those configurations you've dialed in? What about things like high availability? Anybody's 2004 WebSphere implementation designed for failure? Probably not. So, and things like networking, right? What about all the networking constructs that we're used to in the enterprise? So for net new applications, we're going to show you some cool stuff there too, but this is where when we're talking about a hybrid cloud strategy and not just saying net new cloud and we'll just have all these little silos that we manage, this is the value prop, right? Or one of the value props. So if I dig a little deeper into an order entry app, that was one of the ones on the stack I had a minute ago. So here, we talk about 3-tier applications. I went crazy. I have 5 nodes here, right? And this is what a lot of us vendors do sometimes, right? We show you a 3-tier app and we tell you how we're going to make it better. But it's not just a 3-tier app, right? This is just production. What about, as Roshni was mentioning before, staging? What about UAT? What about dev test? What about break-fix environments? Now, even if you don't have all of these or the 7 that Roshni listed out before, even if you have 2, how many folks just go straight into production? Right? And some of you actually probably do and aren't raising your hands, but it's not advisable all the time, right? So people will say, well, do we really have this many environments? And you do, right? So maybe production's at 3.1, staging 3.2, UAT's waiting for staging to get out of the way, so it's 3.3, devs are off at 3.7. I have a customer in the central US that has a break-fix environment that is an absolute mirror image of production, because in their words, if the app goes down, people could die. Don't mean to bring things down. But it's pretty significant, right? So they want an absolute mirror version so that if anything happens, they instantly can jump on it. And for some of the savvy folks that take things like reservations into account, your production and staging are maybe 100% because they need to mirror, but maybe I have my UAT at 70%, devs at 50, and my break fix is down at 20 because it's critical, but I can always power other things down and juice that up if I need to in case of an emergency. So this is your actual application infrastructure impact for what gets defined as a 3-tier application, right? So when you take something like this and apply what I was showing on the previous screen, which by the way, this whole stack is just your app servers. What about your web servers? What about your messaging servers? What about your database servers? So if we're talking about, okay, can we take advantage of all of this really cool hybrid goodness and cloudy goodness, but apply it to what we do today? This is why when we say we support more operating systems than anybody. Why does that matter? That's why it matters. Roshni mentioned before about all the different applications and stuff that we support. That's why it matters. Concepts around networking and fencing off applications the way we do it today. That's why it matters. So, getting started with this, I mean, we're not going to show you how to migrate WebSphere to vCloud Air, in case that was what you thought I was alluding to. But we do want to show you a couple ways that you can maybe start thinking about how to strategize, depending on where you guys are in your life cycle. So the 4 basic pillars. So how many folks here do custom development? I'm assuming if you came to the test dev session, a decent number. Okay, cool. So who here, when Roshni mentioned before, I just showed about having 3 environments, anybody have the 7 environments, like what she was also? Awesome, okay. Well, I don't know if you don't think it's awesome, do you? 5 or more?
Perfect.
3 or more? God, I have a lot of hands for that. Okay, cool. So, the 2 pillars on the left here, who here has packaged applications? That's a bad joke, sorry, pretty much everybody. So the 2 green pillars on the left are kind of targeted more towards package apps. So as we say up here, testing new applications. So business users, they want to try stuff, right? So why not let them try it out on a vSphere compatible cloud platform, because not all projects succeed. If it does, you can drag it right back into your vSphere environment. Things like upgrading existing applications. Do I really want to have all this extra metal sitting around just for when I have to do upgrades? And then the 2 pillars on the right in blue representing your custom development. Okay, the new in-house applications, that's kind of table stakes, right? That's what most of the cloud was born out of. Hopefully we'll show you a slightly different way to do that. And then Cloudify, your SDLC, Cloudify, kind of a fun word. But even for your existing apps and even that WebSphere stack, how can we make that more agile? How can we not do quarterly builds? How can we make it so that 80% of the process is automated, and once again, using the cloud for test dev for that stack, but keeping production on premises. And by the way, it's not all or none, right? We want to show you a variety, and whatever fits for your use cases fits. So Rashni is going to start with theme one.
Sure. We'll start with the simplest and easiest test dev process, testing new packaged applications. As an organization, you want to test out every new packaged application that's out there in the market. Not all of them will see the light of the day, so you want to make it as cost effective as possible. So vCloud Air is the easiest way to do it. And it's mainly because it's the same environment I mentioned before. It's an exact replica of your on-premises environment. You can minimize your hardware footprint and do all the test dev in vCloud Air and bring it back once you are ready with it. Then you can provide on-demand access to compute. We recently announced Virtual Private Cloud on demand. It's our pay-as-you-go multi-tenant offering. You can do the test dev process on that and then bring it back or even host it on vCloud Air once you're ready for production. Then the migration path is simple and easy. With vCloud Connector, you can migrate the test dev or the packaged application back to your on-premises environment in simple few clicks. And we'll take a look at that in this illustration that we have for you. And if you're not able to follow this, please raise your hand and I will try to slow it down. We have 4 different themes here and we want to make sure that we cover that as much as possible. Okay, so how many of you are familiar with this screen?
Yeah, have you guys actually logged into vCloud Air? Have you gotten to see it? A couple of you? Cool.
Of course you are, David.
If not, sign up for the EAP.
Okay, so this is the sign-up screen for vCloud Air. Still has the old branding, vCloud Hybrid Service, so bear with us on that. So I log in, and this is the first screen that I get. You get a snapshot of resources. You get CPU, memory, storage, etc. And as you can see, I only have one virtual data center. So if I have subscribed to a multi-tenant cloud, I only get one virtual data center. If I've subscribed to a dedicated cloud, I can create as many VDCs I want.
So how many, before you continue on that, so for folks that haven't logged in, how many folks have logged into AWS, Google, some of the other cloud providers? So this is pretty much the equivalent of their dashboards. So we're obviously presenting it differently, and our initial offering of what we've brought is about compute, right? So everybody in this room, we're used to racking and stacking our hardware, putting down vSphere, and now I have a pool of resources to be able to spin up my virtual machines. This is the exact same concept, right? You have a pool of resources that you can pick from. Even with our early access program around our on-demand offering, it's still a pool of resources that you can pick from. So your virtual data centers are where you're going to place your virtual machines.
Okay, so if you click on the virtual machines tab right there, you get a list of VMs that are available in my virtual data center. And I have a big list, and I have not created my VM yet. So what I'm going to do is to click on add a new virtual machine and select a virtual data center. And as we saw previously, I only have one virtual data center in my list. So I'm going to select that, hit continue. And then it'll take me to a catalog. So I have a catalog of my own, and VMware, we will provide you a separate catalog. So you can bring in all the catalogs that you want. You can use content sync feature in vCloud Connector and synchronize all your templates from your on-premises environment, or use the catalog that we provide. So in this case, I will select the CentOS template. And this is the screen to create a new VM. And if you've used other cloud providers like AWS or Azure, you can see that this is not t-shirt size. You don't have to select a specific size from the list of VMs. You can put in your own memory, you can put in your own CPU, storage, and create a custom VM. And this is why it is exactly same as creating a VM in your on-premises environment. So I'll deploy this virtual machine, and you can see the Sugar CRM VM in my list now. So I have created a VM. Now what I'm going to do is to install all the prerequisites required for Sugar CRM, Apache, PSP, MySQL, and all the things that are required to set up a Sugar CRM packaged application. And then I am going to set up Sugar CRM. And once I'm done with the setup, I'll push it out to my internal users for UAT, for testing and all that, and get their approval. And the process is similar to what you've done in your on-prem environment. So once I've done that, what I'll do is to go to vCloud Connector and click on the Sugar CRM application and then hit copy. I'm going to copy it to my on-premises data center. And here in the vSphere web client, you can see that I have a Sugar CRM application. So to summarize the whole process, I created a VM in vCloud Air. I installed all the prerequisites. I installed Sugar CRM. I pushed it out to my UAT internal users. I did all the test dev, and then I moved it back using vCloud Connector. Pretty simple.
So once again, the value prop, and hopefully you guys are seeing where I can do all of that without worrying about my internal resources, right? I can go out here, I can provision this infrastructure. If they decide they didn't like Sugar, I just kill the virtual machines, right? And I didn't have any impact. I didn't have to budget for it. I didn't have to build infrastructure. I didn't have to worry about for the next 3 years when I'm buying all of this infrastructure, are they going to want to try Sugar? Are they going to want to try other apps? You're able to rely on that underlying vSphere that because it's the same virtual machines, I'm just going to pull them right back into my data center if they decide that they want to use the application.
So the next theme we are going to look at is upgrading a existing package application. And we're going to use the same Sugar CRM example that we saw in the previous theme. And the value props or the advantages are exactly the same thing. You can eliminate internal hardware overhead. The copy migration process is simple and it's a few clicks. Then you can easily duplicate your on-premises environment or your application environment to vCloud Air using vCloud Connector. And it is compute resources on demand. So you don't have to have a overhead, or you don't have to budget for it to do test dev or to do upgrade of your packaged applications. So I'm going to try and catch up with this video, so hopefully. So as you can see in vCloud Hybrid Service, there is no Sugar CRM-Next or Sugar CRM application right now. So I'm going to go to vSphere web client and see the Sugar CRM application, right click on it. I'm going to clone it to a template, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with the clone process. I don't have to educate you on this.
Anybody not clone a VM before?
Okay, so I select the primary cluster, hit next, and thin provision and all the things that you're familiar with, and create a clone of my Sugar CRM application. So the next thing I am going to do is to go to vCloud Connector while this is cloning. Next thing I'm going to do is go to the vCloud Connector, and I'm going to copy it to vCloud Air. Okay, so there it is, vCloud Connector, and in the private data center, you can see the Sugar CRM-Next application. I'm going to copy it and select the target cloud. In this case, I'm going to select VCHS, which is my vCloud Hybrid Service, and I want to keep the name Sugar CRM-Next, and I'll select a catalog, which is VCC, and my target VDC is the one virtual data center that you guys saw before. I only have one VDC in my subscription, and I want to deploy this vApp after copy. I want to deploy it in direct mode and not fence mode, and I'll select a network configuration. I want to power on the vApp or the VM after deployment, and I'll hit next. The next step in a copy process for vCloud Connector, if you're not familiar with, is a validate process. So every time I copy, I have to validate it, and once the validation is successful, I'll hit finish, and on the right-hand side, you can actually see the progress of the copy.
That's fast.
So now the next step is to go to my vCloud Air subscription, and my Sugar CRM-Next VM will be right there. So there it is, Sugar CRM-Next. So I have copied a packaged application, and now I want to upgrade it. It is the same Sugar CRM application that I had before in my on-premises data center. So once I copy it, I'll go through the upgrade process for the Sugar CRM application, go through the standard process, hit next, 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 and continue. And it is ready for my internal users to test it out. So the point here is there is no budgeting, there is no extra money that is required for you to test out or to upgrade your existing Sugar CRM application. So the risk is minimal, it is very cost effective, and you can do it in simple steps. And the testing process is valid because vCloud Air is based on vSphere. So whatever you do on vCloud Air will hold true for your on-premises infrastructure as well.
Yeah, and to kind of carry on a little bit, I know when we do it's one VM or one app, it might seem like overkill to go out to the cloud and upgrade it and bring it back again when it's just one virtual machine. I mean, most folks probably have enough capacity to handle that. But when you're talking about dozens of apps, 50 apps, 100 apps, and unpredictable life cycles or unpredictable needs to do upgrades, that's when that kind of scale leads to you having to have that kind of capacity available, right? Because you might be doing so many of these upgrades, and now you get back into the different stages of upgrading, that's where the value prop starts to come in. So don't think of it as, I'm going to buy some cloud just to move one virtual machine over and upgrade it, right? I mean, once again, we're trying to show you some example use cases on how to get started. So the third theme, when we talk about developing brand new applications, that actually is a chunk of code of mine. It's MIT licensed. You're free to use it if you want. But once again, this is where cloud kind of got its legs, right? Developing brand new applications. So from our perspective, it's very similar to what you see in other cloud providers, but being able to use those templates and what Roshni was referring to before around having that stability of the underlying platform starts to matter. So if we go out, what I'll illustrate here, and we're going to do a live demo for this one, is I'm going to come out to VCHS, or vCloud Air. Wow. So for some of my teammates in the room right now, we actually have to pay a fine when we say VCHS. So all apologies, our vCloud Air console. Yeah, there you go. So when I log into my vCloud Air console, as Roshni was showing before, we're going to go ahead and create a virtual machine, and we're going to make this be kind of analogous to Jay building a brand new application, and we're going to deploy it to the VM. So maybe I'm going to go ahead and put Tomcat and MySQL on one VM, not uncommon, right? I'll build it, I'll test it, we'll validate the whole thing, and then we'll migrate it back into our private data center again, right? So I'll come over on the right, and I'll add a virtual machine. Actually, I'm bouncing around my windows here, losing track of where I am. There we go. So I'll pick once again, the one virtual data center that we have. And much like Roshni had pointed out before, I'm going to pick a 32-bit CentOS image. Not that I'm a Mac guy. I'm going to go ahead and pick RoshJ app. Okay, so we'll use the first part of both of Roshni and mine's name. And we'll go ahead and deploy this to vCloud Air. Now, as that's creating, now we're not going to actually go and build the app. Okay, that would be kind of silly. No matter what's on the virtual machine image, that part doesn't matter, right? That's the beauty of virtualization, is that we can do whatever we want with it. But if I come out here now, and to Roshni's point, if I bounce over to the vSphere web client, where vCloud Connector exists, okay, I can come in, and if I refresh my vCloud Air instance, I will now see my RoshJ app-v app in my list. If I go out and simply right-click on the virtual machine, pick copy, so the virtual machine will actually leave from the cloud. It'll make its way through the atmosphere, across the ocean, eventually in our California data centers, in my local vCenter, and show up right underneath our Sugar CRM. Now, you don't have to clap. You don't have to. So here's why I decided to make a joke out of this, okay? Some of you may be getting annoyed by this common theme that we keep talking about, underlying vSphere, move stuff back and forth. But that's the point of the session, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can approach this, but at the end of the day, it's about taking a virtual machine and whichever location you want to run and whatever makes most sense for the business case, you know you have that flexibility and portability of workloads, okay? In this case, although we had fun with it and used the animation, once again, I created the whole stack. I gave my developers the ability to build everything on the cloud. I didn't have to care about the resources, because then when I needed to control it and wanted it on my own infrastructure that I control down to the bare metal, I pull it right back when they're done. So hopefully you're seeing the concept there. So we'll bounce back, and the last one, yep, we did our demo, right, is around cloudifying your SDLC. Now, in California, or I should say San Francisco, VMworld San Francisco, I had a session that actually took place after this one that unfortunately happened earlier here. But it was around using our tools like vRealize and application services to take your existing processes, create blueprints out of them, repeatable blueprints that you can then stamp out to either vCloud Air or your local private data center. So vRealize, or vCloud Automation Center, VCAC users, or at least familiar with the product, okay, some users. Who here has seen some of the more in-depth demos around things like workflow provisioning and approval processes? So a lot of those components, so I mentioned the WebSphere environment, and we're gonna do a real demo on this one. Taking those components, and once again, instead of having it be a deal where when it comes time to do a deploy, we're sending emails to different groups and using spreadsheets or Word documents and following manual processes. Maybe I have some scripts, that's cool, I can run some scripts, but I'm usually updating properties in those scripts before I run them. So how can we change a lot of that process so that I can get some of this cloud automation and some of this really cool stuff that the cool cloud kids are doing and apply that to what I had today? So what I'll illustrate,
and it's a real demo this time.
yeah. So what I'll illustrate here is I do have an environment up already. So this is vCloud Automation Center. So this is the application services component of vRealize. So I'll ask again, anybody use Application Director or familiar with Application Director specifically? So this is the one tool, customers that I've worked with to implement this in the past, I've had them tell me that this is the greatest homegrown product that VMware has ever built other than vSphere. Okay. I don't think anything's going to beat vSphere. So, but it's also the most undercommunicated product, because many times it gets advertised as simply a provisioning tool. Oh, I'm going to create a blueprint and you can provision it, but we can do that in a lot of different ways. So what I want to illustrate around this concept of cloudifying, we are going to go ahead and create a new application, okay? And what this will do, we'll just call this, we'll call it ROSJ app just to stick with the theme. And this concept of business groups and sharing, I'll gloss over it a little bit because it's not relevant, but it allows you to determine who gets visibility to blueprints. We'll leave it at that for now. We can obviously talk more about it if you're interested. The curse of the live demo.
Yes.
There we go. So if I come in here, and now I'm going to create an application version. So this allows me to do things like versioning, right? Over time, as my application needs evolve, I can version so I have prior ones available. We'll keep it at 1.0. I'm a developer, so we just go straight to 1.0. And I will go ahead and create the concept of a blueprint. So when this comes up, what you're seeing here is a very kind of Visio-like canvas diagram. And when I mentioned before about sometimes this tool gets oversimplified, what do I have here? I have a set of OS templates. So what we're going to do together here, we're going to actually drag and drop an app. That's cool, but that's only part of the process. So these OS templates that you see on the left, I'm a developer, right? Or I'm an architect. But these OS templates that I'm being given access to build my app are the ones that you guys have approved and put in there for me to see. So this isn't me out there being a cowboy grabbing whatever OS image I want to, and then once again, when my app is ready to go, whose problem is it? Is it mine? Yeah, it's yours. You're telling me which OS images I'm allowed to work with. So in a traditional fashion, I'll go ahead and I'll drop my load balancer, I'll go ahead and drop an app server, and my IT friends were kind enough to give me one that already has MySQL installed, so I'll just go ahead and grab that one, right? So I'll come over to my load balancer, and I'll give it a nice, friendly name like load balancer. I could change vCPU and memory if I wanted to, so on my application server over here, I'll go ahead and call it app server. Maybe I'll give that 2 vCPU, and I'll give it 4 gig of memory. And I'll do the same thing on my database server. I'll call it database, and I'll give it also, maybe I'll give it 4 vCPU, so they tend to be a little bit thread heavy. I'll keep it 4 gig. We can always change it, right? Okay, cool. So I have my 3 tiers, or my 3 nodes. But my app server, I probably want to, if I have a load balancer, load balancing one machine doesn't make much sense, does it? So I got a little plus here. I can hit that, and it means now I have a cluster, and I can come down and say how many clusters I have. Now, to be clear, the apps you're building would have to be stateless in this kind of a situation, right? It's not magic secret sauce that takes bad applications unless you load balance them for free. Oftentimes when we talk about it, it comes across like that. But in a lot of applications, if you had a caching service, for example, you could have that as a separate node as well. So once again, just we dragged and dropped our infrastructure together, but what do we have on that infrastructure? Well, we have my beloved app servers, right? So if I come down here and I grab for my, let's see, for example, our load balancing layer, I'm just going to use Apache. So I'll drag Apache on here. But every customer is different. So I have some folks where the developers own the middleware. I have some customers where the infrastructure teams. Infrastructure folks, who here is infrastructure and middleware? Anybody? Okay, decent number. Who here has a separate middleware team that manages that? Okay, I expected that. I've seen your hand a couple of times. Developers that own the middleware stack. Nobody, interesting. Okay, so I've seen it all 3 ways. The point here is I've implemented plenty of enterprise apps on my own Tomcat implementation. There's very large organizations, multi-billion-dollar organizations that run Tomcat. They don't want Jay Marshall's Tomcat implementation, okay? There are people that have dedicated their careers to that. So if you have people that do that, once again, just like I pulled OS templates from people that know what they're doing and give me access to them, I'm grabbing the scripts to put down Apache, and I can throw down Tomcat on my app server here from the middleware teams or whomever owns that piece of the puzzle, right? So I'll go ahead and grab Tomcat server, put Tomcat down. Once again, my SQL was already there. So now I come over here, and what's next? Well, I probably have DBAs that have, did I grab the wrong one? Yeah, I grabbed the regular script. They have created either just the default database schema, maybe some reference table data, right? So I'm telling you it's a SQL script, but then I could come down under properties and tell it where the URL is. So if I hit plus, I could actually say, SQL URL, and I could type in whatever the URL is. We're just going to illustrate it like that. And then whenever I come up here, I can grab a WAR file and drop it into Tomcat. And I can see it already has things like the URL for the WAR file. Now, why is this important? So as a developer, I probably use GitHub or CVS, Subversion, whatever your source repository is. And I may be using Jenkins. Any Jenkins users that we know of? You're like my canonical. But it could be any build process, right? The demo that we did in one of my earlier sessions, we actually had code checking into Jenkins. At the end of the build process, when I had a successful WAR file, it'll publish that WAR to this file location. So now anytime I stamp out this blueprint, I'm getting the most recent version of that WAR file. So for folks that are going way down the path of, say, things like Chef, where developers are coding their infrastructure and they own the whole thing, that's cool. That's a great way to approach it. But there's also a lot of other shops that want this level of control where, yes, I want my developers to have control to do everything, but when it comes time to push, I want that control, because we're the ones that have to own it someday. So hopefully you're seeing where some of the value here comes into play. And finally, things like connecting some of these different tiers together and then getting access to properties from the other tiers. So I can go ahead down here and add additional properties, so it would pull things from the database like port numbers, user IDs and passwords and stuff like that. So when I say cloudifying your SDLC, now in this case I used Apache and Tomcat, but you could add WebSphere as a catalog item. These are just scripts. So if I come and look at Tomcat here and I go under Actions, these are just install scripts. Now, I don't care, right? I'm Jay the developer, Jay the architect. I don't care about this stuff. But once again, whatever your processes are, you can build them into this tool, and now everybody's collaborating on that same set of tools. If I drop back out here, maybe look at a deployment that we did in the earlier session. So it was about, let me see here, yeah, go ahead and get rid of that, we don't care. So we did a version earlier on where we built the app I was mentioning before. So this is an example of a deployment that we had done. And this is where it gets really cool. So this is what we call an execution plan. So when we drop down, in this case I used Nginx because that's kind of a fun new load balancer folks are using. I use Tomcat. So you can see that every single step of the process is referenced in this execution plan. And as it's dropping down these bits, you see the little green clouds. That means success. If something failed, you get a red cloud. But where the magic comes into play is it's every single step of the process. When it did the install of MySQL, when it configured MySQL, when it did the script install of the SQL script. So if, for example, the configuration had a little red cloud, this little arrow, I can see the action script, the component properties, or the logs. So let's look at those. Action script. This is the actual script that was run. Likewise, if I come down to the properties, you probably know what's going to come up here. Properties, right? So things like, for example, database port 3306. That's an easy one to talk about, right? It's in the blueprint, but what if Jay deployed this and changed it to 3340, and then after deploy changed it back to 3306? If you go back to the blueprint, it's going to say 3306. This shows you exactly what properties were used at deploy time. Same thing with the action script. If someone messed around with the script and deployed it and said, oops, and then put it back, it's going to show you inside of here. And the part that I like the most is the actual machine logs themselves. Now, probably obvious what you're going to see here, the logs. But why it matters is it's for every single step of the process. So you don't have 10,000 lines of logging for everything that went through the build process and deploy process. It's just for that chunk of the MySQL, in this case, MySQL configuration. So if that's where the red cloud is, you can troubleshoot. So hopefully you see, obviously this is about application services and vRealize, but when we say cloudifying your SDLC, how does this feel compared to maybe some of your current manual processes? And by the way, you guys might have a lot of these problems solved. Obviously you don't have to do it this way. But we see, I get surprised the number of customers that we see that the issues have just perpetuated themselves. So this is a great way, if you haven't done it yet, and also a free advertisement for AVG antivirus. Actually, we can cut that because I never ran out of time. So anyway, hopefully you see the value prop in what we're showing you there. So the core concept around this, once again, what you just saw was vRealize here in the middle. You guys, IT configured policies. You own what pesky developers like me are or aren't allowed to do in your environment, right? But you're giving me access to it. So I can spin up my virtual machine templates, whatever gets checked in, and I can deploy it to either vSphere or I can deploy it to vCloud Air, right? And the software development lifecycle I mentioned before, blueprints being collaborated on between teams, checked into VCAC. My developers can write their code, be completely abstracted from the process. They don't have to care. And through their build process, provision the stacks and place it where they want. The cool stuff.
Thank you. So this is just one of the 5 starting points we have. Apart from test dev, you can extend your existing applications, and David here has a session tomorrow at 11 a.m. And there was a DR session yesterday. You can look at the slides or the replay to understand more about our disaster recovery use case. Then we also have modernized enterprise applications and next-gen applications for more advanced users. So the first 3 are great if you are not familiar with public cloud, and it's easy to get started. And we mentioned about this, our virtual private cloud on demand is now in early access program. So a lot of our customers tell us that, hey, your session was great, but we have no idea how to get started. So this is your perfect starting point. Sign up for the EAP, get started on the on-demand EAP, and then you can test out all these different concepts that we just talked about.
Theater session.
Yeah, I'm going to skip through the slides, and I'll open up for questions.
Yeah, so guys, we threw a lot at you here because we kind of erred on the side of showing you more options. So yeah, please, I know we have one question here.
If I'm looking at it, most of the business case depends on flexibility on demand. So
You know what, I think, I apologize,
Yeah.
I think they're giving you a mic.
Sorry to interrupt.
but most of the business case you mentioned, depending on flexibility on the on-demand model you bring. My question is licensing. If you're looking at your WebSphere, let's say based on Oracle, how do you license it?
Yeah, so if you subscribe to our dedicated cloud, you get exclusive compute nodes. So you can just transfer them.
So you're talking about specifically like the WebSphere business case. So I think the thing to keep in mind, I agree with you that in general, when it comes to on-demand and that quick hit, get in, get out, pay small, agreed, that's definitely one of the business cases, and I kind of intermixed them there. When we're talking about WebSphere and your larger deployments, for folks that are doing larger scale or just true hybrid cloud extension of data center, that's not going to be 5 VMs or 10 VMs, right? It's going to be part of the overall strategy. So in that situation, what Rashi's referring to with the dedicated cloud, okay, that's not the on-demand, but that's more of the hybrid strategy. And with the dedicated cloud, the licensing carries over the same. Did you have a comment, David?
So dedicated cloud as well is your own physical host.
Oh, hold on, David, we got a mic coming.
I understand this, but on-demand it doesn't work.
No, so licensing
Yeah.
with on-demand, you have to consider the fact that there's a number of hosts in that cluster. So when you're licensing things like Oracle applications, they may not be suitable to run in a multi-tenant environment, which is one of the reasons why we actually have dedicated clouds, where you can get your dedicated host and then run those applications due to licensing concerns and restrictions in there.
Yeah, so for your specific WebSphere environment, absolutely. For that question for the on-demand, but for Tomcat, for Nginx, for Apache, for a lot of the new workloads and what a lot of folks are doing net new development with, those would all work just fine.
Yep.
Yeah, we definitely need a mic for you.
Thank you. We're a software development company. We do commercial apps, and we have clusters for vSphere and clusters for vCloud Director. And what we do is we package our application across 4 or 5 servers in a vApp within vCloud Director. And we're constantly cataloging them, cloning them, spinning them up for sales presentations, spinning them down, sometimes deploying them to customers. I'm wondering what capabilities there are for us to extend a vApp within vCloud to a vCloud Air as opposed to just standard VMs and vSphere.
Yeah, so you have the expert here. You have the expert here. You can extend your vApp. You can have your database layer on-prem and have your web layer and application layer in vCloud Air. You can have a part of it, or even the other way around. And David can explain.
But before David goes, I know he's the expert, but what I will share is one thing you might want to consider in the process is when I show you some of the application director components or application services, they call it now. If you're packaging those V-apps, I'm sure the one challenge that you've had up until now is that it's a very heavyweight construct, right? Everything is baked into that V-app.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So the ability to consider the ability to abstract those layers out so that when you actually come to deployment time, you're laying those down at deployment time to not have those dependencies. We can take it offline, but just something to consider in the meantime. David, please go.
So the point that you're making about you've got a whole V-app in vCloud Director and you spin it up multiple times to deploy it in your environment, you can do exactly the same thing in vCloud Air. So vCloud Air is based on vCloud Director. So you can take those V-apps using vCloud Connector, move them to vCloud Air, and still deploy them in exactly the same way that you do in your on-premises environment. Yes. So it works perfectly. And then, of course, you get the advantages of you're not buying your hardware and your resources, leveraging vCloud Air. Yeah, it works exactly the same way.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I'll run.
We're just going to make this guy run around the room a couple times.
So these days we heard a lot about also security concerns regarding the cloud, for example, topics like microsegmentation and virtualized networks, etc. So the Automation Center, from my perspective, should also empower the developer himself to address these concerns. So he has the capabilities to, for example, configure microsegmentation, firewalls, etc. himself, because if you want to set up a test system with from the developer state, so he just uses the standardized components, he needs also the ability to do this, because you also need to test the security infrastructure.
Absolutely. So do you want to?
Go ahead.
So I think, here's the thing, we are from the vCloud Air BU, so I can't speak to the vCloud vRealize roadmap. I would invite you to ask them about that question, because I would say that stay tuned. Those concerns, I agree with 1,000,000%, and I think there's awareness there. And I think that, once again, I can't speak to the roadmap, but I think you'd be
It will
probably
be
happy
addressed
with
very shortly.
So the other thing that I'll add to that, and it's a bit of a shameless plug for a session that's going on in 15 minutes, there's a whole networking deep dive on vCloud Air, and the product manager for networking in Decide will actually talk to you about the micro-segmentation that we can do with NSX that's coming soon. So if you want to know more about how that works, go to that session in 15 minutes.
Yeah, and so that's what we can do on the vCloud Air side, but being able to provision that and set it up from within from application services. Like I said, I think you'll be happy with what you hear. I just don't think I can speak to it. So.
Hey, Jay.
Yes,
Gary,
sir.
Gary back here.
Hey, Gary, actually one of our staff automation specialists. He may be able to help.
Yeah, so I actually represent the automation stack from the team. So I'm also a vCloud Air evangelist. So if you want to take that offline and have a conversation, we actually have some integration points with both microsegmentation with vCloud Automation Center, vRealize automation, and Advanced Services now is inheriting those network settings. So there's a number of things that have come together recently in like the last month that make that available today, and it continues to enhance over the next couple months.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, Gary can say that. I can't.
We can take one last question. Any? Oh. Okay.
Oh no, I'm worried about your question.
So, I love all I've seen. It's very GUI-fied. The majority of our developer base are moving to continuous delivery pipelines using Go, Vagrant, Jenkins, Chef.
Yep.
What I'm trying to do as the infrastructure lead and the cloud owner is to set up best workload placement using vCloud Air, using hybrid cloud, could use public clouds, could use anything.
Yep.
All of this I've seen, is this all wraps up in the API calls? Is this all going to appear in things like the Vagrant capabilities? So that these guys can just basically write their recipes, write their Vagrant files, and they don't care where the workloads go. They all end up where I want them to be for best cost.
Yeah, so you're going right where one of my other sessions went, unfortunately. I'll give you the quick bit, and we can obviously take it offline. Obviously, what we were trying to show here, we were trying to hit a number of different approaches and not hit them at a little bit of higher level. So from a tooling perspective, what you saw there, yeah, I mean, it's kind of out of the box as it is, but to your point, kind of that different way of having the developers own that and have that access is a different way of doing it. So what we've done with Chef, for example, I noticed you bounced your head when I said Chef. I'll point you to some links that we've done the last month or so, but the process of having your recipes and your cookbooks and tying that in with Jenkins deploys and through the whole CD cycle, even to continuous deploy, not just delivery, that whole process where it's part of what we're doing, but I think it depends on how each individual customer wants to do it.
I think they're kicking us out.
Oh, we're kicking us out. So
yeah.
yeah, let's talk about it here. Sorry, guys.
And
It's not a secret. We have to go.
One last request. Please fill out the survey. Please let us know what you liked about the session and what you did not. It'll help us improve next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming.